Coworker became obsessed with my D&D character and crossed uncomfortable boundaries, making work life miserable. This story started some years ago, before COVID. So a guy at work, the GM, was an experienced GM and wanted to form a group to play after hours. Interest was low because the GM is a very try-hard, awkward person and most people at the office avoided interacting with him out of the strictly necessary. In the end, the only people interested were ones who never played RPGs before, and 90% were women, myself included. He ran a medium-length D&D homebrew campaign that was mostly okay, with some weird stuff here and there, but we were all inexperienced and everyone was willing to overlook things in favor of the game and social interaction. My husband is not a coworker, but he knew the GM outside of work and, once quarantine/home office was a thing, he joined the group at the end of the first campaign and the start of the second. With my husband, there were 2 male players in the group, 3 males in total with the GM. The second campaign was the stuff of nightmares. It was a dark urban fantasy setting with fantasy races, mostly homebrewed. We later found out pretty much everything in the setting was taken from creepypasta and horror games, but the GM made it look like he had invented everything. My character was a nun and her stats were focused on combat. The GM pretty much begged me to make her a werewolf. It wasn't my original idea, but he was so excited I figured it would do no harm. And I was wrong about that. On my end, the GM was heavily focused on implying that my character was not a real nun, so in almost every session he tried to insert past relationships or imply that my character's church was fake, and every time I had to assert that she was serious about her calling and celibacy. Once the GM figured he wouldn't succeed in making previous relationships with his NPCs canon, he started focusing on trying to make my character break her vows. So Eve, Rye, single, NPC, became romantically interested in my character out of nowhere. All interactions the NPCs had with my character had a lot of innuendo. Once again I had to assert she was not interested. The GM even had private conversations with me about making my character have an affair with one of his NPCs, and once again I had to assert that my character took her celibacy and her calling as a nun seriously. The result was that from then on, my character started being randomly harassed by all NPCs. So all the time she was called things such as Jesus little whore, church's little bitch, etc. In almost every session my character was placed in random scenes of violence with NPCs with rape heavily implied. Things got so bad, I was the only player to demand entire plots be removed from the campaign more than once. And even after that, things remained so bad that my husband had to speak with the GM in private and say that, if it continued, both of us would quit the campaign. Only after that the heavier stuff stopped and my character was back to only being called the church's whore. It was only during the campaign we found out the GM was a diehard furry. Remember how he practically begged me to make my character a werewolf? He commissioned furry, non-explicit artwork of my character without my knowledge. He commissioned art pieces for the other PCs as well to surprise us at the end of the campaign. I think it's important to say that the campaign was a miserable experience for all players, and all PCs were manipulated/misused in some way or another by the GM. There were a lot of hot anime characters making out, a lot of NPCs stealing everyone's thunder. It was a huge power trip on the GM's side. But the heavy sex/abuse implied stuff was particular to my character. At that point, I wanted absolutely nothing more to do with him, no social interaction at all. My husband still had the opinion that the GM was just an awkward, lonely, socially inept person who just needed a friend to point him a better way. My husband is a big I can change them person. So, for the remainder of the quarantine, my husband remained in a very toxic friendship with the guy. The GM even joined a new campaign as a player and still made things miserable for everyone. Only then my husband realized the guy was indeed terrible and stopped having social interactions with him. But I still need to coexist with the GM at work. I have as little contact with him there as possible and mostly try to behave as if he didn't exist. I also avoid all social interactions with him and am pretty hostile toward him, which no one seems to notice, because everybody is kind of rude with him anyways. But being all day in the same room as him stresses me out a lot. I usually turn my music all the way up when he's talking to someone in the room because I don't like hearing his voice. I never mentioned that campaign to my bosses, HR or anything like that because everything happened in social interactions out of work hours and, after all, that campaign was terrible for everyone, not just myself. Plus, he never behaved indecently with me IRL and I didn't want to make a big thing out of it. Recently, other people at work decided to form a new table with my boss as a GM for the first campaign. It was supposed to be a small table, so when the GM said he wanted in, the table was already full. If he had joined, I would have left, as I have decided to never play anything with him ever again. My boss said he didn't want to make it too big, and the GM could join in the next campaign, as they would be all very short. So I felt safe playing. 2 people at that new table were also in that campaign from hell, one of them even dropped early, and knew of my decision of never playing anything with the GM again. We were all very surprised when, last session, the GM appeared out of nowhere as a secret character and joined our party. I felt physically sick. My reaction was a lot stronger even I imagined. I waited for like 15 minutes, got up, said I had to take care of something, and practically ran from the table. I nearly cried on my way back. And now I have to talk to my boss about dropping the campaign and why, and I'm not looking forward to it. Once again, I don't want to make a big thing out of it, but I'm also not sure if maybe this is actually a big thing and I should bring the GM's behavior to attention. My husband doesn't think this is a big thing. He doesn't think what I went through with the GM is violence or harassment, because again, everyone went through some sort of shit with him during that campaign, even though only mine was sex/violence implied, and doesn't want me to be in a delicate spotlight at work. But I really don't feel safe or comfortable around the GM in these interactions, or at all, and I'm very sad that he ruined another campaign for me. Update 1: I told my boss pretty much the entire story. He was shocked. He has low contact with the GM and I think people at work don't talk shit or gossip about coworkers to him, which is understandable. My boss even said he let the GM join because he felt bad about how cast aside and ignored the dude seemed to be, and now he knows at least one reason why. What my boss will do is let the table die gracefully. He'll suddenly become too busy to schedule the next session. The GM wanted to start a new game and he'll let him try it, because pretty much no one will join. If we decide to continue the game, it will be with the hard set rule that only the OG members of the party can join. So, the other players will probably hear about it, but I don't think the GM will face any real-life consequences, sadly. He's part of a different team, not IT though. Some people mentioned he might be in IT. I'm not in IT either, so I can say our IT team absolutely rocks, so there's nothing much my boss can directly do about it. I also don't think HR will be involved because my issues happened years ago and out of work hours. At the most, there will be more eyes and ears paying attention to any shit he does at the office. I really wanted him to be punished some way, other than being kicked from the table, but I guess that would have been unrealistic. It's kind of bittersweet, though. I also spoke to my husband. It took me a while to make him understand the situation and, honestly, I don't even know if he gets it now. He understood I feel he didn't have my back and apologized for it, promised he'll do better. I retold him the entire story, he agreed I told it as it happened, but even then didn't really think what I went through was violence. I asked if I told this exact same story to HR, how do you think they would classify it? And he went ooh. It was like a light bulb went on inside his head. But even now, when we speak about it, he's a lot angrier at the fact that GM openly cheated on all games than the fact that he harassed me in front of everyone. Honestly, I think he's in denial. Like, there's a huge block. Every time I mention his previous friendship with the GM and call it toxic, he gets really annoyed and defensive and tells me to stop making it sound like they were dating, so he's having a hard time even accepting friendships can be toxic or that he was in one. I think what's difficult for him in all this is to accept that he was part of it. All of it happened with him around and he didn't notice.